Naoki Tate is one of those animators that brings quite varied responses among who you talk to. Many fans' responses when first seeing his work on Super were under the impression that he was an unexperienced nobody and talk about him as if Tate was some random janitor working his way around Toei HQ, when suddenly one day the staff were short on time and they were like, "Oi mate, can you draw?" Kinda. You're hired. And then boom, out came episode 5. Naoki Tate, former janitor, now animator, enters the franchise, producing one of the best looking episodes in the series, only topped by Yukio Ebisawa. All others are quite aware that he's been with the series for many years, and talk like he was some powerhouse back in the day, one of the best that then did a 180 and magically lost the ability to draw. Of course, stripping away the hyperbolic nature of the prior statements, these points are very much real, with exception to janitor Tate, and that is the attitude that Naoki Tate is either unexperienced, a bad animator, or changed his art style drastically. And it's understandable why some of these views are expressed, such as not realizing that the art style some associate with Tate back on Z was usually one seen from a filtered lens. You see, when a key animator is assigned to his specific cuts, he will create a layout illustrating the scale of the characters, their placement in the scene, the perspective of what's being displayed, the background, essentially all the key information that's going to appear on screen. It is then reviewed by the director, then supervisor, and can have corrections applied, essentially redrawing their work. The animator will go off these corrections if made and begin drawing the keyframes, and if necessary, the supervisor will provide corrections over the top again, with sometimes even a chief animation supervisor stepping in. So when going through a compilation of his old work, it may be tempting to associate Tate's style with being more detailed and angular than it actually ever was, and not realizing that oftentimes it was more so the style of the animation supervisor shining through. Of course, you could still catch some familiar traits like chubby hands and his looser approach to characters to an extent, but again, it's not entirely an accurate depiction. However, when looking at his own layouts from that period, they give a much better look. When going side by side, the designs surprisingly aren't overly different from now. Rounded jaws, simple noses, smaller eyes, and a soft look to the art in general were all features that were present back in the 90s. Even in Z and more so GT, you could see his uncorrected work popping up here and there, and again looks very much the same. Of course, Tate years later would push for an even simpler approach, but his adherence to simplicity, generally speaking, isn't new, or is it a revolutionary approach in the animation industry? Norio Matsumoto, the man behind some of the most loved fights in the Naruto franchise, takes a similar approach in the sense that his focus isn't on polished artwork with detailed shading, it's on how the character moves within the scene. And I remember myself actually years ago when watching through Naruto for the first time, I associated the lack of detail to characters in some of the major fights as poor quality and even bad. However, later the same year while I was studying at university, one of the units I had to complete as part of my course was in animation. It was here where my whole perspective on what animation actually is was challenged, but with that also came in understanding the beauty of it. And at the same time, I had only watched Dragon Ball, Attack on Titan, Rurouni Kenshin, that was sort of it. So I had a very limited exposure to different approaches, but as I watched more and more shows and movies, from Jinro and the Wolf Brigade to Fooly Cooly, that certainly changed. And this brings me to the whole point about the label of bad animator, and I believe partly stems from the classic misunderstanding of what animation exactly is, and one which can lead to a viewer offering a verdict on whether something was well animated or not by how appealing and polished the art was. Something again that I also used to do. But what is it then? Well, animation is essentially depicting an illusion of movement through a series of multiple drawings, and there are so many elements that play into what makes something well animated. Through anticipation, squash and stretch, timing, spacing, arcs, etc., all have a role in creating the magic that is animation. Now, back in Dragon Ball Z, the amount of animated movement in a typical episode was usually limited, with a focus on detailed character art pulling the weight in a scene. This isn't entirely a bad thing, and I believe speaks to the skill of a director and animator in how they can create something that sells a sense of a high speed and climactic battle taking place, despite not a whole lot of actual animation. As a result though, by Tate taking a completely different approach with simple art and a strong emphasis on animated movement, it can perhaps feel alien to some, especially when compared to the default look often associated with the series. But just because someone has a different approach and draws characters without 3 tones of shading, without a blocky look to anatomy, or perhaps draws characters simply different to how some fans envision Dragon Ball characters should be drawn in, doesn't constitute their work as being bad, nor does it have much relevance to their actual animation skills. That of course doesn't mean Tate hasn't put out rough work in the past, both in terms of art and animation, although usually in part more so to heavy time constraints than his actual skill level, such as in Dragon Ball Super. But there's a difference between criticizing something that is actually poorly drawn and something that is well drawn but in a different style. Likewise, an animator taking a detailed or angular approach isn't bad either. Personally, I'm actually a big fan of the latter. It's why I love Masaki Sato, Hisashi Iguchi, Keisuke Masunaga, and many others who have worked on this franchise. There's something definitely to be said about the power of detailed designs. Record of Lodos War really blew me away with its beautiful character art with bold rough line work, angular features, detailing all the creases around the face. It definitely suited the tone of the show. Likewise, there's beauty to simple designs like in Space Dandy, allowing for a lot more flexibility and creativity. All in all, it's not uncommon for an idiosyncratic animator like Tate to have their work labeled as bad animation, and it's understandable how some come to that conclusion. It's not like animation is part of the high school curriculum, although I wish it was, might have been something I actually enjoyed, but still though, it isn't exactly common knowledge, and it's kind of unfortunate considering how many countless hours animators like Tate put into their work to then have the word lazy animation of all things thrown at them. Of course, I'm not saying that if someone doesn't like Tate's work, it stems from ignorance and that they don't understand animation. My main point is simply that he is in no way a bad animator, and that is the truth about the man, the myth, the legend, Naoki Tate. So thank you everyone for watching the video. I've been sitting on doing this one for several months now because I know Mr. Tate is a bit controversial, and so I wasn't exactly keen to rush out and get mauled in the comment section. But in the end, this is honestly the most fun I've had writing a video since the Onishi one. Was it to do with creating the intro? Probably, but with that, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.